Hello and welcome. Often regarded as government of the people, for the people and by the people, democracy in Africa is often seen as a system where governance at the top is largely deficient and leadership at the bottom is close to inefficient. But in most parts of Africa, especially Nigeria, sustainable development looks stuck in the middle between treetop administration and grassroots politics, ensuring that the dividends of democracy remains hard to come by. This is Africa This Week, and I'm your guide, Fadishala Shotingwa. We start off the day with earlier in the week. Welcome on board. On Monday, Eritrea reopened its embassy in Ethiopia in a fresh sign of a rapid change in diplomatic relations between the two countries. Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and Eritrea's President Isaias Afwerki reopened the embassy in Addis Ababa in a brief ceremony. The leaders declared their state of war over, and Isaias spent the last weekend in Ethiopia. The rapprochement could help Ethiopia, a landlocked country of 100 million people with the largest economy in East Africa, gain access to Eritrea's ports. Tuesday was the 100th anniversary of the birth of the late Nelson Mandela, and an annual lecture was held in Johannesburg, South Africa. The guest speaker, U.S. former President Barack Obama, warned of the dangers of fake news and the rising influence of strong men in politics. He said some current politicians are seeking to undermine the very institutions and values that give democracy its meaning.
And that kind of politics is now on the move. It's on a move at a pace that would have seemed unimaginable just a few years ago. I am not being alarmist, I am simply stating the facts. Look around. Strongman politics are ascendant, suddenly, whereby elections and some pretense of democracy are maintained, the form of it, but those in power seek to undermine every institution or norm that gives democracy meaning.
On Wednesday, the first commercial flight from Ethiopia to Eritrea in 20 years landed safely in Asmara. The second of two 90-minute flights is the icing on the cake of a peace push by new Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. Families separated from loved ones since the start of a brutal 1998 to 2000 border war sat next to dignitaries on the flight. Reconciliation between Ethiopia and Eritrea could change politics and security in the volatile Horn of Africa region. Every year since 2009, July the 18th is marked as the International Nelson Mandela Day, which coincidentally also means Madiba would have been 100 years old if he were alive today. On Wednesday, millions of people around the world took time out to reflect on his legacy.
The legacy of the late former president of South Africa, Nelson Mandela, formed the crux of this lecture.
Reconciliation. That is Nelson Mandela.
Guests including the Consul General of South Africa, Darky Africa, and the director of the UN Information Center, Ronald Kayanja, espoused the legacy of the late African icon, saying his life is an example for everyone to emulate.
How can we be the legacy? How can we reignite the Mandela in all of us? How can humanity benefit from our existence in pursuit of his values and ideals? But indeed, we can appreciate the humanity hidden in us to be better human beings whose mission is to be our brother's keepers.
Nelson Mandela showed what is possible for our world and within each of us if we believe, dream, and work together for peace, justice, and humanity. Madiba, as we said, devoted his life to overturning the injustice of institutionalized racism.
Keynote speaker, Nobel laureate Professor Wole Soyinka also eulogized the late Nelson Mandela.
Now, I want you to imagine that scenario taking place all over the world simultaneously on a day dedicated to him by the United Nations. And that will give you a measure of the stature of the man whom we are celebrating today, Nelson Mandela. In South Africa, I've been honored by being invited to deliver a few lectures, because in South Africa, a whole year is being dedicated to him, the year of Nelson Mandela.
Seen as the father of South Africa's democracy, Nelson Mandela was the first black president of the country. He won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1993 for his efforts at ensuring global peace.
On Thursday, the Nigeria Employers Consultative Association held its 61st anniversary of mediating with employers of labor centers, and the government in Lagos. The Nigerian Labour Congress, the NLC, also took time to make a position on the new minimum wage, which it wants implemented before the next quarter.
The Nigerian Labour Congress has urged the federal government to ensure that implementation of the new minimum wage does not exceed September 2018.
Clearly, two of the tripods of social partnership, i.e. labor and employers, are already in agreement over the national minimum wage. We urge the last remaining leg of the tripod, which is the government, to do the needful and give Nigerian workers a deserving new national minimum wage before the end of August 2018.
At the 61st yearly meeting of Nigeria Employers Consultative Association, NECA Director General Segun Oshinowo spoke on industrial harmony, which he says will foster growth in the Nigerian economy.
And over the past 61 years, NECA has been working with the other social partners to maintain industrial peace in Nigeria. And through that, we've been able to support the growth of the Nigerian economy. We've been able to boost Nigerian productivity. We've been able to improve the lot of the workers. So to that extent, I think NECA has played an important role in the development of the Nigerian economy as we have today. Yes, we've had our challenges, but by the time you take account of all that, one key achievement of NECA over the years is the promotion of industrial harmony.
We believe that we, the government and labor, we call ourselves social partners, and we all have the same responsibility, the same objective, which is what? To keep improving the socio-economic interest of our country.
Organized private sector NECA agreed to pay the new national minimum wage once it's passed into law.
The national minimum wage you have kept down for almost 5 years cannot meet the reality of today for Nigerian workers. So in principle, we are in support of that. But the issue of the quantum or the level of the increase is something that will be subject to negotiation, which we already have in the National Minimum Wage Committee. And as our members had faithfully in time past implemented the national minimum wage, the Nigerian people can count on employers to faithfully implement the outcome of the ongoing discussion on national minimum wage.
The Employers of Labour Association also introduced 33 new businesses that have joined the Nigeria Employers Consultative Association. Sharon Ijason, TV's News, Lagos.
Rwandan President Paul Kagame is looking forward to Chinese President Xi Jinping's visit to his country, scheduled for Sunday. In an exclusive interview with China's global television network on Friday, the president said he was impressed by China during his visit last year. President Kagame is optimistic the visit of the Chinese leader and further interactions with him will further strengthen ties between both nations and Africa as a whole.
In fact, between China and Rwanda, but also China and Africa. The quality of that relationship has been getting much better and stronger. So we hope in our interactions we can even further strengthen that. Aware of 1,000 young people from our country studying in different universities in China, mainly in science and technology areas, and we continue to see that grow. So even in agriculture, again, as you said, and it's continuing to grow in other sectors as well as grow in these specific areas we already have a good relationship in.
And with that, we have come to the end of Earlier in the Week. Up next is Digging Deep, and that will be after the break. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Africa This Week. Well, if you were asked to think of any African leader who cuts across as a combination of freedom fighter, a peacemaker, a great orator, courageous leader and global icon, who will it be? It is more likely that the name Nelson Mandela would readily come to mind. Over the years, Africa has grown to become a continent where, in the midst of extensive resources and limitless potentials, poor leadership remains the bane of underdevelopment. Joining me to dig deep on Africa This Week is Okenna Nebedum, a lawyer and political analyst. Thank you for joining me on Africa This Week.
Thank you for having me, Africa.
How do you react to South Africa declaring the entire year Nelson Mandela year?
For the man who spent 27 years in prison for South Africa to be free, 1 year for him will not be too much. I think it is the least we can offer to him in commemoration of his 100 years birthday, if he were alive, and then to immortalize him too, but most importantly, to live out his ideals. Those ideals for which he went to prison, those ideals which he preached during his lifetime, those ideals which he, even at a point, offered to die for. South Africa will do well. Africa will do well. And the global community will do well to emulate those ideals and then put them in practice.
Let's reflect on his legacies now. What were Nelson Mandela's legacies?
There are freedom fighters. There are freedom fighters, and there are freedom fighters. One thing that stands him as unique is his principle of forgiveness. Indeed. And while walking past the prison gate, I remember watching the video and reading most of his biography and autobiography. He said he left behind everything at the prison. He left them behind and then came out
all the pain,
to embrace
all the anger, all the bitterness, all the resentment,
all the charges, and all those acrimonies. He left them behind. And he also practices the principle where he said that he allowed the brain to take over the blood, the heart, such that they were saying our heart and our emotions say everything white is bad. But in our brain, we're considering that if we don't talk to these people, our country will be up in flames. So those are the balancing equations of a true leader. You don't go all out for what I will profit, what is beneficial to me and me alone. You, first of all, place your respect on humanity and the dignity of the human person. When you understand that dignity, then you understand also that what is good for the gander is good for the goose. And then what applies to one applies to another. Distribution of wealth, distribution of those qualities that makes life easy for the person that lives in the village and the ones that live in the city. Those were the balancing acts he actually lived out for.
All right, how well, now would we say that Mandela's legacy have been used as an opportunity to adequately tell South Africa's history, especially to the younger generation?
Sure. The history of Nelson Mandela is preserved by the party he belonged to.
The ANC.
The ANC. And even though internationally, people have criticized the democracy there as a one-party state. But if you look at the evolution, within time, you see that there are conservatives and there are the progressives. If you take a little while, an analysis of the wife, the wife of Nelson Mandela.
His first wife, you mean?
The second wife.
Gracia. Michelle.
No, the one that just died recently.
That's his first wife, Winnie Mandela.
I think he married 3 wives either. The first one was Helen.
Oh,
the second was Winnie.
And then the third, Gracia.
So,
but nobody remembers that first wife, please.
Nobody remembers. She laid the foundation for the family anyway. Yeah. And then Winnie was more like the icon, representing the activist, the aggressive ANC, while there are the conservatives who try to balance for that ideal of forgiveness, tolerance, and equality for which Nelson Mandela stands. And then also the institutions there that have established, they don't, like Nigeria, remove history from their curriculum. They teach history. And then beyond teaching about history, they also preserve some monuments in his honor and establish also some competitions in his honor, both intellectual and in sports. And they host events in virtually most of the renowned world universities in his honor too. You
mentioned his party, the African National Congress. How would you rate that party now and after his absence?
Well, the party has been doing well. He laid the foundation of doing only one term, even though their constitution never specified the terms of office. Remember that, yes, he never limited anybody. You remember that Thabo Mbeki stayed there for 9 years, and Zuma 8 years, and eventually, recently, you now have Ramaphosa.
Cyril.
So within all this preservation of those precepts, I believe the party itself will be on the pathway for self-discovery. We have gone past the apartheid regime. We have embraced post-apartheid democracy. Now is a time to really stand out for economic emancipation and what you would ordinarily call the aggression in South Africa, the crime rate. And that is the angle that the party itself should bring in governance that really would tame South Africa, not to have that label as one of the world's hotspots for crime.
Talking about the crime rates now and the legacies of Mandela, he preached forgiveness. Another of his legacies is togetherness. Now that is gradually being eroded, you know, with xenophobic attacks in South Africa.
As much as it also affects Nigerians too. We have been victims.
Especially that. That's the point.
We've been victims as a country. And it would be too bad for South Africa to pay back Nigeria for all that Nigeria sacrificed for them. Most of their presidents were trained in this country called Nigeria. Thabo Mbeki spent most of his life there, and most of them, they went to our universities, they drank our water, they were sheltered here, they ate our food, and all the time, Nigeria has also, beyond rhetorics, has expended resources in monetary donations to the cause of anti-apartheid struggle. It would be the height of disrespect and ingratitude for South Africa to pay back Nigeria with its xenophobic attacks. One is looking forward to having an ANC-led administration that would attack that monster head-on, so that the ideals that the founding father, Nelson Mandela, stood for, equality and respect, would really have a human face.
100 years if he were alive. Now, how can we start breeding, you know, people like Nelson Mandela in our society?
We've forgotten the fact that Nelson Mandela was a village boy. So, taking that into consideration, we should go to the villages.
From Soweto.
We should start from the Soweto. Our own Soweto may be the Ajegunles, maybe the Bayelsa, maybe the Sambisa forests. Equal opportunity, equal education, such that we don't have a situation where only the children of the politicians or the children of those royal fathers, highly placed individuals, have access to better education or to a situation where we don't have equal health facilities for all. A situation where only those who can afford it can travel abroad for medical treatment, while our hospitals and the primary healthcare centers are not taken care of. These are the things Nigeria should look at, and all over the world we look at a situation where we embrace the distribution of wealth and social amenities down to the villages, especially education. It is such a situation and such circumstances that trumped up leaders like Nelson Mandela.
Well, one of the guest speakers was former President Barack Obama. Now, and he paid tribute to Mandela during the lecture. How much of a significance was this?
I remember watching the event, and it was a homecoming for him, and identifying with his roots, the neighboring Kenya, and also the fact that he recognized too that the ideals for which Nelson Mandela stood for, which was international respect, is now gaining ground. You remember, Nelson Mandela said that the mistake most political leaders make is to expect that their enemies will be our enemies. Right now, we have seen the passage of some of those alliances which Mandela had, and those leaders have all been relinquished to history. There were leaders like Fidel Castro, there were leaders like Arafat and all those. And leaders like our own African Colonel Gaddafi. You see, the international community was looking at Mandela with suspicion, cautious suspicion, because of those alliances. But he stood his ground. He stood conviction. And one of his greatest convictions was that you live to prove people wrong by the ideals you stand for. And I think right now, and during the speech, former President Barack Obama recognized those ideals.
And Nelson Mandela really lived as an icon, the greatest icon of all time.
The greatest icon Africa has given to the world.
Indeed. Okay, Nanebedum, lawyer and political analyst, I'd like to thank you for joining me on Africa This Week.
Thank you, Africa.
Well, for a continent on the path of self-discovery at the pace of slow recovery, Africa is fast becoming a region where, even in death, heroes of the past continue to outshine the champions of today. Mandela's story continues to echo through time and space as a reminder to leaders that creating a sustainable future for generations will require a paradigm shift, and that the importance of governance is for prosperity and posterity. That's it on Africa This Week. I've been your guide, Fadisha Lashotingwa. Many thanks for watching, and bye for now.